today I want to start a new series for the next month and a half on the letter to the Galatians, the book of Galatians in the New Testament. We're going to spend the next month and a half or so going through it. And I hope as we do this, that a whole bunch of you are also going to read through the book of Galatians a couple of times. All right? So part of the reason we do these series is that also we can grow in our connection and understanding and immerse ourselves in the Bible, all right? And so we're going to be focused on Galatians the next little while. Now, some of you are thinking, okay, so what kind of questions are going to come up in the book of Galatians? And there's very many. I can't obviously cover all of them right now. But some of the questions we want to touch on, I'll just quickly go over 4 or 5 here at the beginning. But one of the questions that's going to come up in this book is a huge question in the book of Galatians, or the letter to the Galatians, is, does the Old Testament have any authority over our lives today? And if so, what kind of authority, or which passages, or all that kind of stuff? Second question we're going to look at is, how do we overcome sin? That's a big thing in Galatians as well. What is sin? How do we overcome it? Here's another one that might seem like, what? But also in Galatians, how should Christians today think about the modern state of Israel? That's something that's in the news all the time and that Christians disagree about or don't know what to think about. That's another thing that's going to come up in this series on Galatians. And have we missed out on what the good news of Jesus really is? That's a big one that's going to thread its way throughout this whole series. But I'm going to start off message number 1 with a little bit of a different kind of question to get us into this series. And the question is this: what do St. Patrick's Day and the Boston Celtics have to do with Galatians? Wait, what? What does St. Patrick's Day and the Boston Celtics have to do with Galatians? You're saying, what are you talking about? Now, for those of you non-sports fans, right, maybe you don't know who the Boston Celtics are, all right? So the Boston Celtics, I'm probably going to get in trouble. The guys are already worried I was breaking copyright laws with this. I think it was on Facebook. I just took a Google image, but are famous, they're probably the most storied franchise in the NBA. They got 18 championships, all right? They just won another one a couple of years ago. Here's a picture of their team. That's the Boston Celtics, very famous professional basketball team. And their logo is this little Irish guy with a cane. So what on earth does this and St. Patrick's Day have to do with each other and with the book of Galatians? Well, leave that. So you got the Boston Celtics, you got the logo, you got St. Patrick's Day. Put it on a shelf, just keep it there. Just hold it in your one hand. Now let's ask another question, and then we're going to see if we can bring these together. Who were the Galatians? So it's called, now often we talk about it as the book of Galatians, but in actuality it's a letter, and it starts out this way in verses 1 and 2, Paul, an apostle. I just took out a couple of little things there of the introductory so I could get this all on one screen. And all the brothers and sisters with me, to the churches in Galatia. All right, so Galatia, what is Galatia? Well, Galatia was a province of Rome, a Roman province, all right? And I'm going to show you a map here. Here's the Roman Empire. Where was Galatia? You got the Mediterranean Sea here. You can see on the boot the city of Rome. That's Italy, modern-day Italy now. You can see Europe. And over here, what would today be modern-day Turkey, in Roman times was the Roman province of Asia. And in the middle, in this little pink area here, this is the province of Galatia. So this letter is to a couple of churches, probably not many churches, might have been 2, maybe even 3, but it's just a couple of churches in this little province in the middle of what is today Turkey, the Roman province of Galatia. Now, why Galatia? How did the province of Galatia get its name? Is there any meaning behind this word Galatia? Well, it turns out the reason the Romans called this province in what is modern-day Turkey, the reason they called it Galatia is they named it after the original group of people that settled here before the Romans conquered it, and they were known as the Galates, all right? So I'm going to show you this in Galatians 3, verse 1. You foolish Galatians. He actually really likes them. We'll see this. He's mad at a different group of people, but here he's telling them they're foolish. Who has bewitched you before your very eyes? Jesus Christ is clearly portrayed as crucified. And the word here for Galatians is the Galates. That's an ethnic group. All right? And it was the Galates who originally settled in what became the province of Galatia. So the Romans just called the province after them Galatia. All right, now you say, why on earth is this in any way interesting to us today? And what on earth could this have to do with St. Patrick's Day or the Boston Celtics? Well, the interesting thing is, or the next interesting thing is, that in the Greek language, they use two words interchangeably for this people group called the Galates. They were also known as the Celts. And you can see where this is going, which in English, at a certain point, became the Celts. And for some reason, the Boston Celtics call them the Celts, I guess, but I don't know why they do that. It's supposed to be actually the Celts. But anyway, so these were the Celts. Now, some of you have heard of the Celts. And you're like, I thought Celts were people who lived in Ireland. And you would be right, all right? But the Celts lived all over the place, all right? So here is where the Celts all spread. They started out in Middle Europe. You're like, I didn't come here for a geography lesson. Just wait. Those of you who don't like geography, you can just brain wipe yourself with a magnet after the service, all right? Important information will be gone from your brain if you keep it, I know. But anyway, the Celtic people started out in Middle Europe, and then they spread east, west, and south all over into, you can see up here, Britain and Ireland, and down as far as into what is today modern Turkey. Now, of course, not everybody in the province of Galatia. By the time the Romans conquered it, it's not that they're all Celts. All right? But you have a mixture. That's how the province got its name. However, there are some commentators, and they don't all agree on this. But it's possible, actually, that Paul specifically planted these churches with some ethnically Celt people in this province, which I think is actually kind of cool. But anyway, but not necessarily by the time it's Roman, it's Galatia. But that's where it gets its name, and that's the connection. Now, the connection with St. Patrick is St. Patrick was a missionary. So St. Patrick and Paul both did missions with Celts. So St. Patrick's Day is the day we celebrate the missionary St. Patrick, who went to the Celts in Ireland. And Ireland kept its Celtic roots, speaking Gaelic, which is a Celtic language, commonly into the 1900s. There's even people in Ireland who still speak it today, although most of them just speak English with a very awesome accent. But they kept it to very recently. And Boston was a place where in the mid-1800s to the 1900s, many Irish immigrants came. They were fleeing the potato family. Hence, the Boston Celtics named their team that, and that is the connection between Galatians and the Boston Celtics. So if you really want to be a nerd, if you want to be known as a Bible nerd with your fellow basketball friends, you could start calling the Boston Celtics the Boston Galatians. Or you could start calling, if you're a basketball nerd around your Bible friends, you could start calling the book of Galatians the book of the Celtics, all right? But nonetheless, that's just a little intro to the Galatians and where they're from and who they were. And clearly, Paul was not ministering to people who look like this. By this time, they had been fully Hellenized, which just means they had become normal Roman citizens. But Paul had not originally intended to go and plant a church among them. The only reason he went to them in the first place was, as you know, he says to them in chapter 4, it was because of an illness that I first preached the gospel to you. All right, so he got very sick, probably disgustingly sick. Like, this is not like the flu. You don't take a detour into a whole new area because you have the flu. If you have the flu, you hunker down for a few days, you get over it, you move on. Something weird, gross was going on with him. We don't know what. And that's why he ends up in Galatia. And why would he go to Galatia for that? We don't know. He had a lot of missing information. But he hadn't intended to go to them. And they know for somehow, they're like, as you know, it was because of an illness that I first preached the gospel to you. Verse 14, and they took him in joyfully. It says here, and even though my illness was a trial to you, you did not treat me with contempt or scorn. Instead, you welcomed me as if I were an angel of God, as if I were Christ himself. Now, just time out here for just a moment. We pass over these verses so quickly and easily as Christians in our modern day with our modern Bibles. So we read, wow, these Galatians, they just took them in joyfully. Of course they did. Can you imagine if you were a Galatian? a Celt, possibly, ethnically. And this random guy walks into your town, into your city. Random guy. He's wandering on the roads, and he's visibly sick. Possibly rashes, skin disease, or pus of some kind. We don't know. And this guy wanders in, and you take him home with you, and you and your friends and your family take care of him joyfully as if he's an angel. How many of you would do that? Right. You say, well, that's such a person should go to a hospital. Yes, we have hospitals for people like that. Thank goodness, in modern times. But even if we didn't, most of us here wouldn't take them home. Some random guy, why would you do it? I don't know why they did it. But these are remarkable people. Like, you have to think, don't just think, like, we can get lost. Paul's really upset in this letter. We're going to see that throughout this series. He's very upset. He's mostly not upset. Well, he is upset with well, we're going to see all of that. He's upset at some people more than the Galatians, but the Galatians are all in that. But these are remarkable people. What kind of people take in a random sick stranger and joyfully care for him as if he's an angel? And Paul fell in love with these people. They were so generous. They were so hospitable. They were such risk takers for him. He just fell in love with them. And so he planted a couple of churches. He wasn't even intending to be there. But he could not help but love these Galates, these Galatians. And so he plants a couple of churches. But unfortunately, the love did not last. And there's heartache. And so we read in the next verse, where then is your blessing of me now? Right? Have you ever had that? Have you ever had that where you had an amazing friend? Or even more, like in this case, like a new friend, someone that maybe it wasn't from childhood, but you ran into kind of a very person who's very different from you. Could be a different culture, could be different whatever, different something, but they're very different from you. You got to know them, and there was this connection. There was this deep friendship that formed. It was so special to you. And now they've turned against you, it looks like. Where then is your blessing of me now? Now they took you in when you were disgusting and sick, and now you're gone, and they're rejecting you. What's happening? I can testify that if you could have done so, you would have torn out your eyes and given them to me. Now, lots of people based on this have thought that he had some kind of an eye problem, which, who knows, it might be. Most likely, this is just a turn of phrase. It might have been something with his eyes, but it could literally have been anything. It's just like similar to the phrase we would have, I cut off my right arm for you. Right? It's just a saying of like, you would have done anything for me. But now you're distant. Now you don't like me for some reason. Why? What's happening? Have I now become your enemy by telling you the truth? From this shocking hospitality of a random, sick stranger to now these people turning on him, their enemies. It's deeply painful. This is the heartache behind the whole letter. So what is happening? Well, he goes on in verse 17. Those people. Uh-oh. There's the Galatians, so we have another group of characters in this Galatians storyline, in this Galatians drama. We have Paul. We have these wonderful Galatians, these Gentiles from the Roman province of Galatia who loved Paul. And now we have this third group of people, those people. Not even named, just those people. A third group of people that has come along after Paul left, and they're trying to drive a wedge between Paul and the Galatians. And Paul is upset. He's a whole bunch of things. In some ways, we're going to see in this letter, he's a little bit panicked, it seems like. He's very anxious. He's very, very hurt. And he's angry. But those people, there's a third group, are zealous to win you over, but for no good. They want to win you over to their side. So you were on my side. You loved me. You took me in when I was at my lowest, and you loved me and I loved you. And I started some churches among you, and we were family. But now another group comes in. They're trying to win you over. Now, what are they trying to win the Galatians over to? Have they come along with a different religion? Have they come along with a different Bible, a different God. What are they trying to win these Galatians over to? They're trying to win them over to their side over Paul's, but what side is that? Well, we'll find out more about who they are and what their side is in chapter 1, right near the beginning. And Paul says, I'm astonished that you are so quickly, so speaking to these Galates, these Galatians, I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you to live in the grace of Christ and are turning to, very important two words, a different gospel. A different gospel. So right away, we see something here. The word there for gospel doesn't matter. You don't need to know it, but euangelion, it's a Greek word, just means good news. It's specifically something that Christians used as that was their word to encapsulate the message about Jesus. That's specifically what this word is. So in other words, these are other Christians, okay? They're not a different religion. They're not bringing a different God. They're not bringing a different Bible. These are Christians, but it's a different gospel. So they're coming and they're preaching to the Galatians good news about Jesus, which is just what Paul preached. But it's a different good news about Jesus, which was very confusing, which is really no gospel at all. Evidently, some people are throwing you into confusion and are trying to pervert the gospel of Christ. Now, imagine being these Galatians, brand new Christians. They're not Jews, okay? This is, by the way, time out for just a moment. The Galatian church is pretty unique among all of Paul's churches. So if you read in the book of Acts and some of Paul's other letters, usually the way Paul works is this. He's a Jew, and he understands what we now call the Old Testament, but for them it was just the Bible. That was all they had. They didn't have a New Testament. So he just had the Jewish scriptures. Paul knows the Jewish scriptures. He's steeped in them. He himself is a Jew. So the way his mission formula went is you would travel around. You'd go to Corinth, or you'd go to Ephesus, or you'd go to wherever you'd go to start a church. And he would get, the first place he would go is he would go find his fellow Jews. Because in most of the big cities, you had, all around the Mediterranean in the Roman Empire, in most of those cities, you had big Jewish centers. You'd have some synagogues, you'd have Jewish people doing business and all kinds of stuff. And Paul would usually go to the Jews first because he spoke their language. They understood the Bible. They shared the same Bible. They shared the same God. And then he would tell them about Jesus. And then he would try to get a base of operations going from there. And then from there, he would reach out and try to reach non-Jews in that area. That was Paul's formula. I'll show you as we go through the book of Galatians. I don't have time to do it all in this first one. Galatians is an interesting, the churches in Galatia are different. It doesn't seem that there were any Jews in them to start. So he gets sick. He ends up in some cities that don't have Jewish populations. And he starts these churches with pure Gentile populations. They're pagans. They believe in many gods. They don't have any history with the Jewish scriptures. He doesn't have a common language with them. But they just love on him and take care of him. It's crazy, right? So he comes along and he tells them about the Messiah. They have no history with the Messiah. They have no history with the Bible. They have no history with there being one God. They think there's many gods. So Paul comes and tells them the good news about Jesus. Woo! Now Paul gets these churches started, starts feeling better, as he always does. I'm out of here. I'm going to go start some more missions. After he leaves, a group of Jewish Christians, we're going to find that out too in this series, but a group of Jewish Christians come along, and they also say, we're preaching the good news of Jesus. And these Galatians go, yeah, same as Paul. And then, whoa, this is a very different message. And of course, that's something we grapple with in our modern days. Now, the fact that there are, something I quote regularly here, and in fact, I do it very intentionally. I try to do it a few times a year. But something I bring up regularly here at Crossview in sermons is the fact that we have over 45,000 Christian denominations in the world today. And if any of you ever wants to look that up, I have links for you. There are Christian scholars that track all of this and count it and all that sort of stuff. And for some Christians, that's a wonderful thing. Oh, look at the diversity of Christianity. And for other Christians where they've just been in their own little one Christian bubble, they thought there was only one kind of Christianity. Every time they hear that, it's like, oh, that's scary that there's so many different kinds. All right? But this goes right back. A lot of Christians think that the diversity of Christianity is a modern thing because of how sinful we are. Actually, it's just a feature of Christianity. It's been right since the beginning. And these Galatians get exposed to it. Whoa! How can two groups of people both preach the good news about Jesus, believe that he's the Messiah and he died on a cross, and preach such radically different things? Paul comes along and he says, Jesus died on the cross, here's the good news, to set you free. And now all you need to do is love people and love God. Now this other group of people comes along and they say, yeah, Jesus died on the cross for your sins, so you could be forgiven for your sins, and now you need to obey all the commands of the Old Testament, including, or not all of them, not the temple ones, but including circumcision, which is kind of a high bar if you're an adult male in ancient times and there's no anesthetic. Okay, so let's just say that for just a moment. That's what they want these Galatian Christians to do. Now, so let's just review this just very briefly here, okay? This is a bit of an oversimplification, but we're going to see this throughout the series. Paul preached, and by the way, I very intentionally put the word easy in there because it will make some of you go, oh, I don't like that. Because we have been conditioned to think of the word easy as a bad word if it's connected with faith or walking with Jesus. The only people for whom faith is easy are people who just want to sin. That's kind of our conditioning. But I want to use that word just to trigger that in you, and so bring that to the surface, and we can kind of think about that as we go through this series. But here's what Paul literally preached. We're going to see this throughout the book of Galatians. Trust Jesus and be free. Well, now what we do? Now love God and people. We're going to see that message throughout the book of Galatians, the letter to the Galatians. But now those people come, a third group of people that Paul calls those people. They say, trust Jesus and be forgiven. And of course, there's forgiven and freedom in both. Paul would have agreed, yes, yeah, Jesus died on the cross for your forgiveness. I'm not saying that part is different. And then he said, and because of that now, you guys get to be circumcised. And you get to do all those wonderful food laws and be passionate for God. Now, why? Like when you look at these two things, now we have a story. As modern Christians, we have a story that we tell ourselves about what human nature is like and what Christian faith is like. And the story is this. Our story is we human beings always want to take the easy route. And the easy route is the bad route. That's the route that gets you sent to hell. Now, first of all, there certainly is a whole pile of truth in that statement. There are many times when we as human beings want to take the easy route. And there are many times when taking the easy route, doing the easy thing, is the wrong thing. But the thing we often do not acknowledge as Christians is that is only one side of a very big coin. And the flip side is just as real for us as human beings. The flip side is that we human beings often actually want to do the harder thing. And often, the harder thing is not the good thing. Let me give you some examples, because we've been so conditioned to think hard is good and easy is bad. So let's just take a couple of examples. Let's talk about celibacy. Whoa. Do you know how many millions of Christians over the last 2,000 years, do you know how many millions of Christians have taken and continue to take, but have taken vows of celibacy? I don't know the number, but it's lots. It's in the millions. And many of them, now some of them were no doubt called for it. Some of them were wired for it. Some of them had no choice. All right? No doubt. And for some of them, it was a wonderful life that they lived for God, and their celibacy helped them live for God more. That's great. That's a small percentage of the millions. many of the millions took vows of celibacy and didn't get married even though they desperately wanted to, and didn't get married even though they actually had people they were in love with, and forewent having a family and having that marriage connection simply because they were convinced that being celibate and not being married, and they had Bible verses to back them up, by the way, that being celibate and not getting married was actually the more spiritual thing to do, that is the only way to serve God, that is the best way to serve God. Now let me ask you something. For many of these people, was that the harder vow or the easier vow? Harder. I mean, not in every case. But in many cases, that's the harder one. That's the more suffering one. That's the more lonely one. And guess what? Many hundreds of millions of Christians never took that vow, got married, had kids, and all kinds of stuff, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't make your life necessarily all that much better. It's not bad to be celibate or to be single. The point is, just because it's harder doesn't mean it's better. Many people have lived perfectly happy, wonderful, easier lives, not taking that vow. And guess what? God doesn't love them one little centimeter less. We could go on and on with examples like that. In the Middle Ages, literally hundreds of thousands of Christians over the course of several centuries left their homes, left their families, many of them never to see their families again, and went on the Crusades. Now, was going on the Crusades harder or easier than staying home? I'll tell you, it was a lot harder. If you went on the Crusades, first of all, it cost you massive amounts of money. Massive amounts of money to get yourself all the way to Jerusalem. It was horrific. Imagine traveling more than 2,000 miles, but you're not going by plane or car. You're going by foot and horseback. It was a terrible journey, and many died of disease on the way. And then when you get there, it's fighting and bloodshed and people dying. And you're not even actually doing, not only are you not doing something good, you're doing the hardest thing, and it's also a wicked, evil thing that will be remembered as a stain on Christians for all of history. Meanwhile, many people just stayed home and got to stay with their families and keep farming or doing whatever it is that they did, and they live much easier lives, and the ones who did the hard thing not only didn't do a better thing, they did a worse thing. Just because something is hard doesn't make it good. Crusades, celibacy, we could go on and on. I think of many of the stories of missionaries I read in the 17 and 1800s. Lots of missionaries, particularly British missionaries, hundreds of them, probably thousands of them, would go on missions, and they would leave their kids in boarding schools. And many of them, and I just can't even imagine. As a parent, I can't even imagine saying goodbye to my kids, and I'll see you in 4 or 5 years for a couple of months, and then I'll leave again. Now, again, some missionaries, no doubt called by God, made those sacrifices. It all worked out. Do you know how many parents did that? Now, that's hard. That's harder than just keeping your kids with you or staying home with your kids. Do you know that whole generations of missionary kids were lost to the Lord because they were essentially just abandoned by their parents and raised by other people? The harder thing is not always a better thing. It's not always a more spiritual thing. It doesn't always make God more pleased or make you a better person. So why would the Galatian Christians even be tempted to choose this hard gospel? Like, why didn't they just laugh? Like, honestly, there's a part of us, like, honestly, Paul comes and says, here's the good news about Jesus. Now you're saved. Just put your trust in him. You're saved. Now a group of other people come, and you don't have to do anything else. Just love people and love God. Now this other group comes along and says, yeah, Jesus is amazing. And guess what? Here's some Bible verses. You actually have to get circumcised. At that point, why don't they say, bah, you are crazy. I'm not doing that. Literally, why don't they? I'll tell you why. Because we human beings actually, one side of the coin is, yeah, we like things easier. Actually, another side of the coin is there's something deep in our psyche that we actually want things harder. And when it comes to faith, that one's often just as big a problem as the easy one. So the reason is because of, one of the reasons is, here's this thing, is because of fear. There's some other reasons too we'll get into in this series, but there is fear. I want to show you something here in this verse, back to verse 7, which is really no gospel at all. Evidently, some people are throwing you into confusion and are trying to pervert the gospel of Christ. Now, this word that the NIV translates confusion, in every commentary I've looked at on Galatians, they think this is a bad translation. Reason? Confusion just is like, it's like what a math kid gets. You know, a kid in math class who hasn't been paying attention the whole way through or is just struggling to, grasp a concept. Is like, well, I'm confused. Oh, these Galatians are just confused. They just don't know which gospel it is. There is so much more going on. They're not just confused. The Greek word here is tarasso, which definitely has a connotation of confused, but mixed with deep anxiety, worry, and fear. Which is why many of the other translations, for example, the ESV translates it as trouble. Not that there is another one, not that there is another gospel, but there are some who trouble. They're not just confusing you, they are troubled. These Galatians are afraid and want to distort the gospel of Christ. See, I'll tell you one of the problems for us as Christians, we think the only thing we have to worry about is people who preach an easy gospel, because that's when we're going to go to sin. Actually, there's another thing we need to worry about just as much, and that is people who want to make the gospel harder, which panders to deep fears and anxieties we have in us that the good news really can't be that good. See, at the deepest part of our human psyche, we are actually wired for performance. Now, this isn't actually, I don't think it's even because of sin. Like people are like, oh, it's just because of sin. Well, everything is just because of sin. I actually just think it's so we survive. Why? I think if we weren't wired to perform, we would have died out as a species like thousands of years ago already. Because what gets someone to get up in the morning and go plow the field again, or go hunting, or go gather food, or work hard to put together shelter or clothes? It's because we know that these things are going to just fall out of the sky. We have to do something in order to get something. And in fact, most of us here would agree that those people who just expect the world to be handed to them without doing anything, we think of them as spoiled what? Brats. They're spoiled brats. And usually older people think the whole younger generation is spoiled brats. So it's always, those kids these days are just spoiled brats. They expect everything. By the way, you can go back. I can show you quotes going back generations and generations. That's what every old generation says about the young generation. So before you get hard on all the kids these days, they're just brats. They want the world given to them. Yeah, that's what our grandparents said about us, and that's what their grandparents said about them. It's like part of the human cycle. We all, at a certain age, get to complain about, it's our privilege to complain about the younger generation. But it's part of this. Don't be a spoiled brat. You have to know, somewhere in you, you have to know that you have to do something to get something. That's actually a good thing, not a bad thing. It's just, it don't work when it comes to faith and God's love for you and what it means for you to be part of God's family. So actually, it's easier to believe a gospel where I have to do stuff. And that's why Christian history is a constant cycle of new movements coming up with new stuff that you have to do in order to be on fire for God and to be the true people of God and to usher in the second coming of Christ and on and on and on. You can actually literally just go through history and see every 30 to 50 years new movements all over the world that just do the same thing over and over and over again. And guess what? This will continue until Jesus actually does come back, because it's just how we are. In the end, it is very difficult for us to believe Paul's gospel, which is trust in Jesus and be free. Now love God and love people. something in us goes, no. There has got to be more to it than that. Even now, I can feel the disbelief in many of us. I knew this guy was dangerous. That is not it, Kris. There is more to it than that. I know. That's why we're going to spend a month and a half going through Galatians. And I'll just show you what's actually in the book of Galatians and what Paul is arguing for. What if the good news really is good news? And what if life is already hard enough that we don't have to make it harder to follow Jesus as well? Like, I just know, here's what I know from meeting with people every single week, meeting with Christians. I know that many of us struggle in all kinds of areas of life. We struggle in our relationships. We struggle in our finances. We struggle in our emotions. We struggle with physical illness. I just had another guy again come to me this week. I get an email in the day, hey, would you have time for me? I sit down with him. You know, not an old guy like my age. And just that morning, devastating diagnosis. Life is already hard enough without us Christians going, okay, now also, in addition to how hard life is, what kind of extra things must I do to make God happy with me? And Paul says, he died on the cross for you. To adopt you into his family, he loves you. And that's the good news. Now, freed by that understanding that God loves you and the gospel is a free gift to you, now go and love God and love people. But we receive it for a little bit. It's like, oh, that was amazing. I felt so good. And then a week later, it's like, okay, but now what? No. It's not that good. There has to be, what's the hidden cost? Surely this must cost me something. And Paul says, anything that adds to that good news is no gospel at all. God loves you. He died for you. Now you say, oh, but what about sin? Okay, oh yeah, we'll get to that. Yeah, that's in Galatians too. It's also important. But anything that adds to that, trust Jesus and be free, Paul says is no gospel at all. What if the good news is so good, we have to resist our human inclination to make it harder? So, let's take some time to pray and think about that for the start of this series. And I do hope that a bunch of you are going to join me and not just believe what I'm telling you, but are going to join me in reading through this book this coming week. So I'll start putting out devotionals again whenever we do a book study. I do devotionals. They'll come out on Tuesday afternoon. But let's read through the book of Galatians. And what if the good news is so good, we have to resist our human inclination to make it less good? Let's prayerfully consider the following things. Do you often feel like you're not doing enough for God? Have you ever questioned that feeling? Often when we have that feeling, we just assume it is from God. Have you ever questioned it and thought to yourself, where is that coming from? Do you regularly feel God is not happy with you? We often don't question that. We just think, that's from God. If I feel like God feels not happy with me, then he must not feel happy with me. That's a whole lot of feelings. What if that's not coming from God? What if that's coming from inside of you? What if God is far more loving and far more forgiving and far more accepting of you than you have ever dared to imagine? I want you just to bow your heads with me and close your eyes. Father in heaven, would you please help us to start questioning our doubt about your love and acceptance of us? Would you please help us to start questioning this human impulse to make the very good news much less good news? And as we go through the book of Galatians, would you help us to open up our hearts to your infinite acceptance and forgiveness and love in such a way that it actually does transform the way we go out into the world and accept and love others? In Jesus' name we pray, and all God's people said, Amen.